Laura Palmer and Twin Peaks may be dead in the U.S., but they're alive and well in Japan.
Hey, what's up, Goth Gamer Nation? Now I know what you're thinking. What? This video doesn't seem to be about Supernatural. Either that, or what? This isn't Vines that cured my depression. And you know what? I'm a little disappointed too. But if you've got the time, here's a little video for you to watch about a certain video game that is 11 years old now? Fuck.
Deadly Premonition, or Red Seed's Profile, as it's known in Japan, is a survival horror Dale Cooper anime simulator developed by Access Games and published by Rising Star Games and Ignition Entertainment for Xbox 360 in 2010. It was initially exclusive to this console in the US and in Europe, and it did not receive an Australian release, as Access Games knew the content featured in the game wouldn't meet their strict specifications and chose to just not bother submitting it for a rating at all. The version covered in this video is the Director's Cut, which was developed by Toybox Inc. and published by Rising Star Games for PS3 and PC in 2013, which featured updated visuals, controls, as well as new story elements. There was also a more recent port without the Director's Cut content released in 2019 for Nintendo Switch called Deadly Premonition Origins, presumably retitled because they were about to launch its Switch exclusive sequel, A Blessing in Disguise. So lots of different titles and variations, all released to varying degrees of stability. Anyway, Deadly Premonition is primarily the brainchild of game director Hidetaka Suehiro, also known as Swery65, and producer Tomio Kanezawa, who was impressed by Swery's work on 2003's Spy Fiction and pitched to him a game titled Rainy Woods, after Access had stalled for a year to get Spy Fiction 2 off the ground. It was originally conceived as a simple but thematically unique PSP game in the vein of a Suda51 production, where I can only imagine Swery got the inspiration for his pseudonym having similar aspirations as an auteur maverick game developer. With the impending 7th generation of consoles, Kanezawa suggested the dev team focus on reshaping the game as a next generation release almost a year into production. From 2005 to release day in 2010, Rainy Woods would be put through a rough development cycle with many periods of stagnation, many near cancellations, and at least one real cancellation. The trouble began with their goal of releasing on both PS2 and Xbox 360, consoles that have very different hardware, and was simply asking too much of a studio that was already having difficulties staffing for the project. One of the more significant setbacks that helped define what would become Deadly Premonition cropped up when a trailer for Rainy Woods premiered at the 2007 Tokyo Game Show. For this part, I don't have a lot of clear answers on the validity of this claim, but also it doesn't matter because I'm not a game journalist, nor do I have any kind of commitment to reality. After all, look at what I've decided to try and do with my life. But this first trailer shows off a slightly different variation of Deadly Premonition, one that leans in much harder on the game's, and you didn't hear this from me, inspiration. Hidden beneath the subtext of Deadly Premonition are a series of Easter eggs and references to the American television program Twin Peaks. It's blink and you'll miss it stuff, but it's there. And boy, it was really there in this trailer. So I'm gonna guess when this trailer started circulating, one too many people expressed excitement that someone was making Twin Peaks the video game. And out of fear of accusations of plagiarism, several cosmetic changes were made to differentiate it more. It was further retooled when the publisher found the game's content to be too dark and violent for the Western audience they were trying to appeal to, specifically a US audience. Which is weird because not only do we greatly enjoy violence, in fact one of the first things I tried to do in this game was hurt innocent people. And no, I'm not going to examine that further, but you base this game off a show that is very adult and dealt with a lot of really dark, violent, and sensitive things. In any case, according to Swery, this entirely different, more cynical and urban take on the idea would be cancelled in the beta stages due to, as he put it, politics, which as we all know do not exist in games. And Deadly Premonition as we know it properly kicked off production a year after this trailer in 2008, even though everything in that trailer is very much still present in Deadly Premonition. Some character models have been changed and voice actors replaced, but the bones of all this are still there almost identically. The biggest contrast between the two projects appears to be their name, which only changed after the US publisher suggested the new title, to which they just kind of shrugged and said, yeah, alright, I guess. This is mostly conjecture, of course, and probably putting needless faith in rumor, but it's one of few conclusions I can draw when the game's creator is very particular with his words concerning a certain television show. You'd be hard-pressed to find an interview where he outright admits his game's slavish admiration for Twin Peaks, which I get. It's a beautiful series, and I think what was done with Deadly Premonition and even Rainy Woods is artistically solid. It's okay borrowing, so to speak. It's a viable step in creating a unique work. It's okay that you did that. It's just really odd that either he doesn't think that's what he's done, or he thinks by not mentioning it, he's gotten away with something. But I see it, buddy! When Deadly Premonition was first released in this generic, unassuming box for $20, it was met with historically polarizing critic reception, earning itself an entry in the 2012 Guinness Book of World Records Gamer Edition, if that is a publication you wish to put any credence in. IGN famously awarded it a 2 out of 10, describing it as awful in nearly every way, and as a system killer, as in once you play it, you'll want to go sell your system. A number of other negative to mixed reviewers would refer to it as being graphically and mechanically backwards, being full of bugs and crashes, having bad music and bad dialogue, with a plot that is near incoherent, which, to be fair, are attributes you're not unlikely to hear from even strongly positive reviews. Countering this was a well-known 10 from a then Destructoid writer and current YouTube personality who would paint it as a charming, self-aware exploration of bad taste and bad design. A game so transcendently bad that it's admirable and worth playing for the experience alone. Despite this reaction, the game quickly developed a devoted cult following. In truth, much of its initial success was the result of how notoriously strange the game was, the conversations it stirred up. But it being an incredibly niche, budget title that was in development for 6 years, it wasn't exactly a recipe for financial success. It took time, but Deadly Premonition clearly found its audience, enough to warrant its re-release in this form, as well as other things like its sequel and a board game. Lots of things that aren't a patch to make the version I played work. Deadly Premonition follows a quirky FBI agent named Francis York Morgan, or York, who's picked up a case in a small town in Washington called Greenvale. An 18-year-old girl named Anna was murdered in a bizarre and ritualistic fashion, her body displayed extravagantly in a tree and her throat filled with strange red seeds. Red seeds York has found at several other crime scenes. On his way to town, he becomes distracted with a phone call, his laptop, a hot plate, a fax machine, his pager, a conversation with himself and his failed attempt to light a cigarette, so he almost hits a figure standing in the road, but swerves out of the way, careening into a ditch. While trying to walk the rest of the way to Greenvale, he's attacked by several zombie-like creatures called shadows that emerge from the ground and bend over backwards. These first few moments teach you a hard lesson about what you've gotten yourself into playing this game. York begins to more directly address a disembodied character named Zach. He just sort of puts his hand to his head as if he's using a Bluetooth device and starts talking to Zach. You don't yet know why he does this or who Zach is, but for the time being, functionally this is York's way of addressing you, the player. It's the game's way of breaking the fourth wall without really breaking it. It's less like a break and more like it's a part of the wall. It's a window, much like when you actually mistake someone taking a call wirelessly for them actually talking to you. It's like that, but both. I'm good at writing. York seems mildly concerned about the appearance of the shadows, but not enough to outright ask for an answer, concluding that
life is fun because of the mysteries. Right, Zach?
Oh, see, this Swery guy is a true Lynch head. We definitely would have not hung out in film school, as I had dropped out very quickly because I refused to talk with other human beings. Oh man, but you know I would have been glancing down at and trying to draw attention to my funny game shirt so someone else with bad taste in films would acknowledge me. Once out of the woods, the red vines and shadows dissipate, and he's able to make it to the bridge leading to town, where he meets the local law enforcement. Emily, the deputy, George, the sheriff, and later Thomas, his assistant. Unsurprisingly, this experience isn't worth bringing up to the other characters, so we carry on as if that didn't happen. York's odd dismissive behavior and willingness to interrupt conversations with asides to Zach creates friction with the police. He is clearly a skilled detective and profiler, but he also seems tuned into some pathway of thought that not many are. He has prophetic dreams and receives clues in his coffee, but tensions only increase when York is shown the body of Anna and confirms that she was murdered in the same manner as the serial killer he has been hunting, resulting in him assuming control of the investigation. On his way out of the hospital, he sees visions of Anna seemingly leading him somewhere and is once again attacked by shadows. When he snaps out of it, he's introduced to Harry Stewart, a wheelchair-bound man in a gas mask that speaks in rhyming couplets through a monotone interpreter. Greenvale is a small town full of distinct, idiosyncratic characters, and all of them are suspects in Anna's death. Some of them will obviously appear more suspect than others.
Anna, her smile, so warm. Anna, blonde hair, so bright.
Zach, I don't mean to alarm you, but I think I just meant Mumford or one of his sons. Maybe a Lumineer.
Beginning with the examination of Anna's body, York begins to find recurring imagery of what appears to be an inverted peace symbol, something he assumes is another calling card of the killer, and expresses an anti-peace sentiment. He finds this same mark apparently tattooed on someone's back in a photo at the crime scene. But I'm honestly not sure if this thing in York's hand actually is a photograph, or if it's the game's representation of a clue, like a concept in his hand. There's some things about the logic of this game I don't entirely understand. They also find wood chips that suggest that the place Anna was displayed was not where she was murdered, and it's likely the actual killing happened at a lumber mill nearby. Because it would otherwise deny you another combat section, York asks Emily and George to wait outside while he investigates the mill. This time he is attacked not only by shadows, but pursued by a raincoat-clad, axe-wielding figure with impossible strength. York, of course, doesn't outright say he was attacked by a magic raincoat man. He instead puts a tiny scrap of the raincoat man's raincoat into a little bag and asks Emily if she's seen it before. And without skipping a beat, Emily's like, "Oh, this looks like a raincoat that probably belongs to a serial killer in a raincoat." Oh, that's what I didn't want you to say. That explains that serial killer in a raincoat I saw earlier. Emily thinks this is strange, as it's just known that in Twin... people don't go outside while it's raining. George explains that this superstitious behavior began decades ago due to an urban legend of a deranged killer in a red raincoat who would appear whenever it rained and murder people with an axe. Despite George's dismissive opinion of it, the whole town effectively shuts down whenever it rains. Shops close, schools empty. In an attempt to not jumble up this game's rather dense story, I've left out the Red Room storyline and the director's cut exclusive framing device. While all of this has been going on, York will either subconsciously or interdimensionally appear in a surreal dreamlike world called the Red Room, where he interacts with characters. Some are unknown to him, most are involved in the investigation. The framing device adds another aside in the story, showing an elderly Zach recounting this profoundly adult story involving murder, rape, and child abuse to his granddaughter.
Is it a scary story?
It might be. Do you know what a BDSM cult is? You ever been to a goth club? I've got some Combi Christ albums here.
Well, I laughed at it. It causes the tone to jump around more than it already was, and really it's probably only there to set up the game for a sequel, because without it, the game ends with a great deal of finality. It feels like, well, we did everything, all the big stuff at least, so it always struck me as odd that there was so much push for a sequel. It's kind of like that point in Season 2 of Twin Peaks, when the story's inciting mystery is concluded, and they were just like, well, what else is going on in town? Maybe James gets framed for murder. Maybe Billy Zane shows up. After the scene at the mill, you are pretty much turned loose to do whatever you want. There are timed story events you show up for within a certain window, but you can also take your time to explore other side missions or recreational activities. The main story is broken up into chapters that function like episodes of a TV show, complete with a helpful previously on montage that also plays when you load a saved game. In an odd coincidence, a mere 3 months after the release of Deadly Premonition, another Xbox exclusive heavily inspired by Twin Peaks would be released, Alan Wake, that similarly played around with TV show conventions, perhaps a little more literally in their mimicry of serialized television. Come to think of it, all three of these things share a willingness for self-parody, referencing the media they are twisting to their own ends. Twin Peaks has its cheesy soap opera, Invitation to Love, Deadly Premonition has its mystery thriller novel called Liar's House, and Alan Wake has its Twilight Zone parallel called Night Springs. Great minds, I guess. I suppose if you're not on board by now, or at least morbidly curious about how all this pans out, you may have a rough time getting into this game. I feel like this is a game where you can determine that pretty quickly. You've seen how it tells a story and how it plays well enough to know whether or not you have the patience for it. If you'd like to experience this game on your own, without further spoilers, you can go ahead and skip to this time. Otherwise, I will literally spoil the whole thing. I will ruin it maliciously so, robbing you of your own individual experience. I would say this is certainly a game that is best enjoyed blind, which is hard now considering how much of a meme it's become. Odds are people who are interested already know things like the funny lines, like my coffee warned me about it. Well, if you didn't, I guess that's sort of a spoiler too. See, I'm already spoiling things. You gotta get out of here. I guess also a blanket warning for light to moderate Twin Peaks spoilers. At least the original series, given that it is 30 years old now, so you've had time to watch it. You could have been watching it this whole time while you were watching, I don't know if people watch anymore. Dallas? Is that still going? Anyway, seeing as though The Return didn't come until long after this game, I guess it's not entirely relevant. But we could talk about it anyway. I like the parts where David Lynch says literally anything. Coop, fuck, York, asks Emily and George to show him their backs so he can rule them out as suspects. Breezing right past how inappropriate this request is, they both do it, and while neither appear to have the inverted peace sign, George does have a series of intense scars all over him, the origin of which he chooses to keep to himself. The next day, they call a town meeting to make sure everyone stays inside while it rains, explaining that the murderer may be mimicking the legend of the Raincoat Killer. At this meeting, York gets to meet most of the townsfolk, many of which have been personally affected by the death of Anna. He's also invited to meet with Harry and Michael, and I don't know what it is, but there's something about these two. Something adorable.
Mr. Francis York Morgan. 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 Mr. Francis York Morgan.
The next morning, York bumps into a guy named Forrest Kaysen and his dog Willie. Forrest travels the US selling the saplings for red trees, which you'd think York would be more interested in, seeing as though red seeds are significant in this case, but that doesn't really come back until later. For the time being, York is mainly interested in Forrest because he was shown his initials in his coffee earlier. Next, they visit Diane, the owner of the town's art gallery, as she was the only one out of town during the murder. She has an alibi, but York lets her know that he's still suspicious of her. I like a lot of this initial investigation because I can tell we're scratching at the surface of a whole network of lies. Diane's secret relationship with Nick, a married man and co-owner of the local diner, and her mysterious conflict with Thomas's sister Carol all hint that Greenvale has a lot of dirty laundry beneath its picturesque exterior. I guess it's also weird that every now and then we shoot zombies for a little while and never tell anyone about it, but whatever. Nick's wife, Olivia, suspects that Diane and her husband may have had something to do with Anna's murder and offers to meet in secret, so she gives you a key to the backyard of the diner. York and Emily plan to meet back there around closing time, and then that's the end of the game. That's it. It just kind of kicks you to the desktop and there's no end credits or anything. It's kind of weird. See you later. Oh, so apparently it's just a common game-breaking bug, and there is actually a fuck ton more game after that. Egg on my face. I thought that was the end. I thought the game ended there. Thought it was over. Olivia confirms that she thinks Nick may have been responsible since she can't account for what he's been up to, but in the middle of this conversation it begins to rain, and George radios them with news of another possible attack happening at a woman named Becky's house. Becky is Diane's sister and was Anna's best friend. York once again faces off with the Raincoat Killer, but is too late to save Becky. Even though she's technically alive when they find her, George's insistence that they cut the wire suspending her results in them essentially garroting her as she falls. And I promise not to incessantly bring up Twin Peaks. Actually, I don't, but this scene in particular I think is really strong and works both as an homage to that show and as a display that this game has not only some clever writing, but a pretty good understanding of tone and how to play with it to purposefully jump back and forth between emotions in a jarring way, something Twin Peaks was masterful at. It's really kind of powerful and sad when they find Becky. She's struggling to tell them that cutting her down will kill her, but she's had her tongue cut off, so all she can do is cry and move around while they fumble with the pliers, and in her last moments there is this sweet vision of her reaching out to Anna to join her in the red room like some kind of cosmic purgatory, but that's jarringly interrupted by her coughing up a mouthful of red seeds and a key, as if this moment was almost going to be sweet, but it was dragged back into the brutal reality of what just happened. They decide to follow up on the lead with Nick and tail him back to Diane's, but they arrive to find that Nick slipped past them and a clearly drunk George. Once again, they fail to save one of the Raincoat Killer's victims. This time, however, Diane begins to behave bizarrely, seemingly oblivious to her myriad injuries. There's something gleefully fucked about this woman enthusiastically describing this big sculpture while her tongue has just been cut off and there's just blood and red seeds pouring out of her mouth. It's certainly memorable, and once again they are able to offset this with something really absurd to take the tone into a hard turn.
Thomas will need a body bag too.
Hi, doggy.
Willie, Forrest's dog, just kind of trots by and York decides to follow him to find Forrest, who apparently also had a secret relationship with Diane. And from this point, York sorta looks at him differently. Like he's a suspect now, but also like he just doesn't buy a word he says. It's one of few occasions I can really read the expression on these mannequins featured in the game. After his drunken fuck up, George opens up to York about his child abuse. His mother would perform something she called tree punishment, leaving him with a body covered in scars. This left within him a fear of weakness, which he apologized to York for, as it probably led him to being needlessly difficult with him. This story he tells echoes into the game's final moments and is in retrospect prophetic of George's story arc. There are a few scenes where York and Emily have lunch or meet for drinks and just talk at length about themselves, and these moments are really sweet. You see them building a relationship, and there is a decent build up to it. It's during one of these talks that York opens up to her about Zach. Though he seems unaware of the reality himself, it is made relatively clear that Zach is an emotional crutch that York developed as a child after witnessing his father shoot his mother and then turn the gun on himself. It was in this moment that York and Zach became friends. It's kind of adorable and weird and sad that York reads Emily's interest in Zach in a competitive way. I mean, I'm sure she's probably put together what's happening here, but he sees this literally as Emily having a thing for his friend, and he agrees to respectfully not stand in the way if he feels the same. York finally decides to visit Harry Stewart, who appears to know a great deal more than most about the murders and the town's history. He proves this by revealing to York that the red seeds that have appeared at every crime scene are from trees that grow in the town's graveyard, and that there is some dark local folklore that says consuming them and then killing someone may make you immortal. He also claims the legend of the Raincoat Killer is based on a real event that he was present for 50 years ago that has been all but scrubbed from history. Even the records from that year seem to be missing from the police station, and with Thomas disappearing around the same time, and him being the only other person able to access them, it naturally has them concluding that he must have been responsible. Harry recounts a rainy night where he witnessed soldiers releasing a purple gas from the town's clock tower, a gas he suspects was created with the red seeds. He left in fear only to find the townsfolk rioting and killing each other indiscriminately, one of them being his own father in a raincoat who seemed to revel in the chaos. In the aftermath, there was a sort of unspoken gag order about about the incident, but that didn't stop people from staying inside whenever it rained. While Emily and George head off on a lead about Thomas, York chases the ghost of Anna to the club owned by Thomas's sister, where he finds what appears to be some kind of secret hidden sex dungeon, as well as a locket with the inverted peace sign on it, before being knocked out by Thomas. He has a series of dreams and conversations with himself where he sort of accepts that he's in love with Emily, as she searches for him with Willie and Kaysen's help, leading to a confrontation with Thomas, who reveals that Anna, Becky, Diane, Carol, and himself were in a sort of sex cult or pentagonal relationship with George that started to dissolve once Emily came into the picture. Jealousy and internal conflict led to them being killed off one by one.
Other than York and maybe Harry, Thomas is probably the most fleshed out character, so it's difficult not to feel a little bit of empathy for him. He's responsible for terrible things, but he's probably the only one who was acting solely out of love. And you know what? There's a beautiful...
See ya!
At the police station, they find Carol, who's already nearly dead with a mouthful of seeds, and while Emily tries to keep her talking, Carol shoves a handful of seeds down Emily's throat. Knowing that there is some connection between the gas in Harry's story and the seeds, York puts Emily in a car with Kaysen so he can drive her to get her stomach pumped. He stays behind to face George, who is revealed definitively to be the new Raincoat Killer. He then goes on an extended, villainous monologue about power, where he explains that the red seeds actually give those who consume them powers, near invincibility, something he's been taught to seek because of his violent upbringing, as he pours 2 healthy handfuls into his mouth. Though there is likely no truth to the murder ritual he includes with their consumption, the seeds do appear to raise his power levels and give him a more monstrous appearance. He sees the mark on his back, which he calls the Red Tree, as a sign of divinity or enlightenment in his quest for power, which York solemnly dismisses as merely the mark of child abuse. George is defeated and York collapses exhausted. Waking up a day later in the hospital, he learns that Kaysen left him there, but that Emily was never admitted. He heads to George's house, finding a shrine to Emily, as well as the desiccated corpse of George's mother, with a red tree sprouting beneath her skeleton. Finally, he catches up with the player and understands the peace sign was always a tree. In a flashback from the Raincoat Killer's perspective, we see that Kaysen was one of the soldiers releasing the purple gas on Greenvale, and he seemingly hasn't aged. History seems to be repeating itself as the town is once again at each other's throats. Kaysen taunts York, showing him that he's planted a red tree in Emily, who pleads with York to shoot her, lest she die a slow, horrific death. This moment rattles free a memory in York. We see the moment with his parents again, but more clearly. Kaysen had killed his mother in the same way, and his father's guilt being unable to pull the trigger on her led him to shoot himself. The real revelation here is that this was Zack experiencing this moment. It wasn't a young York being so traumatized that he invented Zack as a comforting companion. This was Zack creating York and handing him over the reins, opting to recede into the Red Room while another personality took over.
Mr. Francis Zack Morgan.
Zack, now in control, is still unable to shoot the woman he loves, leading Emily to tear out the sapling, killing her, and Zack fights a monstrously transformed Kaysen. In an epilogue, Harry explains his reasons for helping Zack. He's actually George's father and felt responsible for what happened to Greenvale, seeing as he had a direct connection to both the old Raincoat Killer and the new one.
And then a man from a mysterious world called the Red World planted a tree in my girlfriend, and I couldn't shoot her, just like my father failed to shoot my mother when the same man planted a tree in her. Have you ever done ketamine?
He walks out of town with Willie trailing behind, the squeaky toy Horcrux of Kaysen still in his mouth. It ends on a pretty substantial down note. I was kind of bummed out, not only because I had shipped these two and then watched one of them die, but because so many of the characters turned out to be in on this whole thing. I guess to some degree, they were manipulated into doing so, either by George, Kaysen, or the Red Seeds. But we only ever see them as adversarial to us until they are united in death at the end, which is close to but also divergent from something Twin Peaks touches on, because that show has a recurrent theme of mostly innocent people being preyed upon or manipulated to be put in these situations. But it's not often characters are depicted as being irredeemably evil. Everybody is other or trying to burn down the lumber mill or sell drugs to high school kids, but there are characters that earn something of a redemption arc and some that slowly drift into cruel or violent behavior, that break and then come back together. Deadly Premonition seems a lot more cynical. Not only are none of the potential victims saved, but everyone he was working with is dead. The light at the end of the game is that Zack was able to overcome a childhood trauma and defeat a great evil, but who's to say some other asshole doesn't find out that eating these seeds turns you into Blanca?
Special Agent Dale Cooper here, sending out a great big hello from everyone at Twin Peaks.
This is as abridged as I could think to make it because I've left out so much, and this is truly the little game that would not end. Its story keeps going on top of the ending credits, but you get the gist. And I don't consider that a failing. I think if there's anything this game nails, it is its story. It's really worth the experience of playing because it puts in the time to make the bigger story beats pay off in a way that many larger games don't attempt. So by the end, I genuinely cared about some of these characters and was emotionally affected by the turns it takes. The price of this is of course some really uneven and honestly tedious or boring gameplay, but it is a very thoughtful and weird story that does manage, I think, to maybe not transcend being a Twin Peaks clone, but certainly create something unique with someone else's toys. There are strange little scenes littered throughout Deadly Premonition that could have only come out of Swery's head. The now famous sandwich scene being a prime example, because it comes out of nowhere, seems completely disconnected from anything in the story, but there's something so particular about it. Like, for some reason this guy needed this to be in the game, and there's a lot of charm to that. It's a surprisingly funny game, and not just funny because it's so wacky, because of the sterling interpretation that it's so bad it's good. There are several visual gags and jokes that are genuinely funny just because they are successfully funny.
Does the doctor like playing games by any chance?
What do you mean?
You could no doubt find some humor in how janky and tonally inconsistent the game can be, which is probably not always the game's intention, but I think that they knew why it was funny, and were probably more aware of that than you'd think.
The whole thing is full of, for lack of a better word, Lynchisms, like just letting you sit in a scene for so long that it becomes uncomfortable. Something the original show did often enough, but certainly the return indulged in more.
Mr. Stewart has been waiting for you. To the meeting room you shall go to.
There's enough sly, wink at the camera jokes to say that they get it. There are of course a lot of holes you can poke in the story, some inconsistencies in the characters, some moments where you feel things dragging to a halt, some weird dialogue about women that I didn't care for.
And carrying bones around with him is like, well, like throwing a blonde in a bikini into a boy's locker room. It's almost like you were asking for trouble.
You look pretty revealing.
That's cool. That's a normal thing to say to somebody. Ma'am, I'm conducting an investigation.
But I can only hope a lot of the questionable shit that crops up in this game, and indeed in its sequel, are the result of a language barrier. It's one of those things that's a blessing and a curse when Japanese games try to faithfully depict the West, especially the US as depicted by David Lynch. It creates this specific alchemy of uncanniness that I sometimes find really enjoyable. I like that this game never tries to take a simple way out of its mystery. Even when a moment could have easily just been procedural, it always defaults to, well, what's something weird we could do here instead? It's how the dog character winds up being essentially the hero of the story. Given more time, I'm sure it would have been revealed that Willy was actually some kind of alien or interdimensional guide or something, other than the simple, beautiful truth that he is indeed a rare pupper. So sometimes I write things and I don't know if it comes across as a joke. I think at the heart of this game's narrative success is the relationship between York and Zack. Even though it does have strong story significance and is explored to a conclusion, it allows the player to develop a sort of friendly relationship with York. You feel like his buddy. He's always talking to you, bouncing his ideas off of you, some of which you can respond to, and because you spend so much time in the car, he just kind of talks to you about movies and his feelings about the other characters. You get to know him a lot, and in a more intimate, believable playable sense, even if it is using an imaginary friend as a proxy. It feels like you're in the car with him, talking about DVD bonus features. Something that was by design, as apparently the team found comfort in just chatting about movies while driving around the states to gather reference material. Despite Swery claiming that Deadly Premonition was not inspired by any one particular piece of media, I'm gonna supersede that and say it most assuredly is. It certainly does enough to distinguish itself. This is absolutely not the story of Twin Peaks, certainly by the end. It winds up making the personal life of its protagonist the centerpiece of the story, though I think it does this while showing consistent reverence for that show. It deconstructs characters, story beats, visuals, music, names, concepts of this show, repurposing them to fit this new narrative. The result is pretty weird, but less weird, I think, if you've seen Twin Peaks, because in looking at old reviews, a lot of things I see described as the weird parts or the bad ideas, they are often parts that are trying to mimic a surreal television show from the early 90s. Now I could go on and on about the ways I've noticed this game borrowing from Twin Peaks, and I will. Starting with the most obvious, I'd say the basic premise of an eccentric FBI agent arriving in a charming small town in Washington to investigate the death of a young blonde girl whose death is mourned throughout the town is pretty on the nose. The first episode of Twin Peaks is the one that is mostly everyone screaming and crying over the death of Laura Palmer, but this death also kicks over a rock, revealing the town's dark criminal underbelly that also includes military secrets as well as other esoteric spiritual forces beyond our understanding. The town itself in both stories is sort of anachronistic, even though Twin Peaks was created in the 90s and takes place in like 89 to 90, it seems stuck out of time. In this Lynchian idealized pseudo 50s, 60s era, people still get telegrams. There's a lot of going to the diner to get a malt and dropping a nickel in the jukebox while you neck with your best gal. The same could be said for Greenvale, which is even more odd since it takes place in the 2000s, but operates the same way as Twin Peaks in the 90s. Nobody except for Harry has anything close to modern technology, and there are sorta greaser, rockabilly characters. The A&G Diner in Greenvale seems to be an almost one-to-one recreation of the Double R Diner in Twin Peaks, down to the cute blue uniforms and even the big ice cream cone on the counter. You could say that about a number of the locations and the general vibe of Greenvale. Both have similar police stations, a bar with a soulful lounge singer against a red velvet backdrop. Twin Peaks has the Great Northern Hotel, Greenvale has the Great Deer Yard Hotel. Both have a significant event happening at the town lumber mill, and there are probably a dozen other shared landmarks and locations. In Twin Peaks, Special Agent Dale Cooper is an unconventional but likable person with strong values and a strong sense of justice, and very much a stranger in a strange land, dressed in a black suit with slicked back hair. Despite this, he's immediately enamored with life in Twin Peaks.
What kind of fantastic trees have you got growing around here? Big, majestic.
Douglas firs.
Douglas firs.
Never passing up the opportunity to compliment the scenery, the coffee, the donuts, or pie. It's one of the most charming things about him.
Damn good coffee.
Zach, this is amazing.
This must be where pies go when they die.
This is a good biscuit. I've never tasted a biscuit this delicious.
And York shares many of these characteristics, especially Coop's willingness to follow investigative leads derived from dreams or other strange spiritual methods, like reading the milk in his coffee. Both dream of two color-coded other worlds, with Twin Peaks' White Lodge and Black Lodge, and Deadly Premonition's White Room and Red Room. Both leads receive cryptic hints from familiar characters in these places, and are occasionally depicted as being older. In place of an internal monologue, Coop is often shown dictating his thoughts into a tape recorder to someone back in civilization named Diane. It's odd but not unbelievable, especially for the 90s. You don't really question it because it makes sense that he'd be documenting his work and informing someone in the FBI of his expenses and needs in the field. In what I think is one of the most fun ideas, and one of the better ways Deadly Premonition remixes Twin Peaks, York does something similar, but it's seemingly addressed to an invisible person, and he doesn't really do anything to hide the fact that he's talking to someone who isn't there. Cooper doesn't smoke like York, but most other characters in Twin Peaks smoke excessively. In any case, the takeaway here is that smoking is really cool. Deadly Premonition has several stand-ins for the odd side characters in Twin Peaks, like a character with a hearing problem that requires everyone shout at them.
Must be hard by yourself.
Oh my, we're all out of pepper. I'm very sorry.
Coat was vicuna. Sounds real good, Sheriff, but I already ate.
Twin Peaks has the log lady, Greenvale has the pot lady. Both diners are owned by a couple, and in both couples the husband's kind of a piece of shit, and then he gets thrown in jail. He gets real mad about it. There are some large differences in the police officer characters. In Twin Peaks, Cooper's immediately trusted by Sheriff Truman, Hawk, and Andy, and regarded in a friendly manner. They get along almost immediately and mostly go along with his strange methods, or choose to smile and nod along even if they don't follow it exactly. York is immediately met with resistance from George and Emily, not so much Thomas because he's sort of the simple yes man like Andy. Both are overly emotional and made visibly upset by the violence erupting in their small town. Andy cries while taking photos of Laura's body, and Thomas vomits at the sight of Becky's body. Emily eventually comes around and sticks up for him, but George never really does aside from the moment he gets drunk and then confides in York about his cruel upbringing. York then gives him some advice and brings him temporarily back to his senses, similar to how Sheriff Truman has his own drunken bender before being talked down by Cooper. Obviously, the investigation into Laura's death and Anna's death plays out much differently and means different things, but that doesn't stop Deadly Premonition from continuously borrowing the visual language of Twin Peaks to tell its story. You can see this in York removing the first red seed from Anna's mouth and placing the case under FBI jurisdiction, and Cooper removing the first letter from Laura's fingernail, where he also places the investigation under FBI jurisdiction. They both confirm that this death fits a pattern of someone they've been trying to track down for a while, calling a town hall meeting to warn everyone that the killer may strike again, while also giving us the rundown of many of the side characters that show up. Both stories have a necklace as a vital clue to the killer's identity.
You took a locket from Diane, didn't you? A locket with this mark on it.
You gotta turn it around, York. She can't see it, you gotta turn. A victim's diary also becomes pivotal to the plot. These leads bring them to a tailing mission where they have to stealthily evade the suspect. Other times, Swery merely borrows a moment or visual and changes it around. York plays chess with Dr. Johnson in order to get information out of him, and a deadly chess match plays a big role in Season 2 of Twin Peaks. At a certain point, our protagonist's hair suddenly turns white, just as Leland's hair suddenly turned white after Laura's death. They both share some dialogue as well.
You seem to know a lot. How long have you been in love with her?
How long have you been in love with her?
Probably the least clever of these is a low-poly piece of set dressing that is literally just the famous photo of Laura Palmer. Like after all this, somebody was like, hey guys, what if we snuck in a little Easter egg for fans of Twin Peaks? On the down low. I'm sure that there are several smaller moments I can't recall, but suffice to say, this guy really liked Twin Peaks, which is something I can empathize with. Oh, wait a minute. No. That made me feel like it is beyond coming back in style.
I remember stepping from the flames.
Nobody else is gonna wade into the ocean of red tape and unsure bets that would be the creation of an officially licensed Twin Peaks game. And even if they did, what are the odds it's any good? I get wanting to will that into existence at any cost. It's a near perfect show that could easily work as a game. Well, I mean, nothing's perfect. I could have done without Catherine pretending to be an Asian man for a couple episodes.
Clever disguise, Catherine. Really brilliant.
Deadly Premonition is an open-world game that is mostly third-person, switching to over-the-shoulder during combat scenes. It seems like an almost needless amount of work was put into the daily cycles of Greenvale. The town and all its inhabitants sort of work on their own scripted schedules. They all have routines and walk around to certain areas every day, returning to their homes at night. It's a pretty sizable map, so you're going to spend a lot of time driving, and driving Regardless of vehicle is really janky and unresponsive. There is no real give when you turn the wheel. York just yanks it in either direction, which might feel better on a controller, but I suppose I could say the same for most of Deadly Premonition's gameplay. It's not often I play a game on PC, and I am constantly, painfully aware that it was not meant to run on PC. Twin Peaks, on the other hand, runs at a smooth 24 frames per second.
It's got good graphics too.
As usual, due to my terrible sense of direction, I still managed to get lost because... Oh, that's James pulling up on his motorcycle. You headed off to somebody that's not Donna? Where was I? I still managed to get lost because the mini map is too small, and the larger map is pretty much the same because I can't zoom out of it, so I can just slowly scroll around, but by the time I find where I'm supposed to go, I've already forgotten where I started. There's a moderate effort made to fill Greenvale with things to do, but I think the intention was to have these long, meditative car rides where you can think about the case and listen to York talk about obscure films or music. Love when guys do that. Just corner you and shove trivia down your throat.
Sorry, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Really? That's a shame. You should watch it when you get a chance. You'll learn to love your name.
Okay.
I should probably get this out of the way. So it's pretty well known that Deadly Premonition didn't have combat for most of its production. The entire edition of these extended shooting gallery segments, where you gun down shadows, was a last-minute idea from the game's publisher. I don't think anybody was deluded enough to think the combat, the thing that was added last minute to placate this fucked idea of what Western audiences want, was going to be the thing moving copies. At least once every main story mission, York is transported to a Silent Hill-esque other world, where a location you've probably seen before is now in ruinous disrepair, with colorful vines blocking doors in order to corral you down a path where enemies spawn. They aren't very fun, and a lot of the time you can simply run past them. I mean, they're mechanically sound. I guess it's just obnoxious that you can't move York and aim at the same time, which you'd think an FBI agent could do. Coop could do it. Coop could do a lot of things you can't do. During boss battles, these approach feeling fun because you have to move around and aim at squirrely targets, but there are very few throughout. You're given a gun with infinite ammo, and you can unlock other weapons that are infinite ammo as well. If not, they frequently give you access to a gun box that you can buy ammo from, and they frequently lead you to rooms like this one, where you can take care of all the cute survival mechanics. York needs to eat and sleep regularly. Food can be found in a variety of places, from restaurants to vending machines to random drops, and beds are pretty frequent as well, but you can also drink coffee to lower your sleep meter, or fill it full of rest. Full of rest is good, not empty rest. I don't know, I don't sleep. You can also make sure he shaves and rotates his selection of suits. Otherwise, you'll get the dreaded stinky detective rank.
What can I do?
Olivia, calm down.
Maybe I should have picked a different tie.
It's obvious that Swery has an affinity for these inessential game mechanics, little things to occupy your time that don't really do anything but keep you invested in your little dude. According to interviews, there were several more things like this added that he was talked out of, including the ability to bathe York and blow dry his hair. At a certain point, I think this becomes a different kind of game altogether. Outside of combat, you're going to be doing some puzzle solving, none of which are all that difficult, and you're going to be collecting clues for York's premonitions. Finding all of them paints a clearer picture of what happened in a particular crime scene. When you encounter the Raincoat Killer, you are going to be subjected to 3 different types of challenges. Usually a rapid-fire sequence of QuickTime events, which nobody is good at and have never been fun in any game ever. Literally the only reason I ever died in this game was because of one of these. Then you're going to have to run from him, which also involves some QuickTime button mashing, and finally you'll hide from him, which just consists of finding a place to hide and holding your breath when he walks past your hiding spot. Honestly, all these things are sort of interesting at first, but you face off against this guy in nearly identical sequences so often they immediately lose any intriguing qualities they had. At the end of a level, you are given money based on how much honor you've collected, which you get from killing enemies and most activities actually. You can also just find little medals floating around that give you some. This collectathon mechanic is one of many kitschy game design choices that are so dated and at odds with the surreal and very adult subject matter, it almost has me thinking there is some kind of subtext behind their inclusion. Or it's meant to disarm you in some way. But that's part of the magic of this entire game. Because it gets certain things correct, it fills me with a false confidence concerning what was and wasn't intentional. Why is there a no smoking symbol on Zack's lighter? Is that smart? Is that funny? What's it saying? Do some things not say things? I'm sort of split on the inclusion of combat, maybe not so much in concept, but certainly its execution is really lackluster. It obviously feels like a rush job, but the thing is, without combat, the gameplay would primarily be driving and watching cutscenes, so I do agree that it would have been nice to have one more major activity in the game, but that's clearly a big old oopsie. A big old fuck, that's not good, man. Big old, oh shit, dude, I fucked up. It's not the only thing this game half commits to. You come across a variety of melee weapons that degrade with use, but I can't think of a time I was compelled to use them outside a puzzle that required one. Car maintenance is a factor in the game. You have to keep your car from being totaled, and you also have to fill it with gas. If either of these meters reach 0, you're pretty much stranded unless you have a flare to flag down help. The problem is that I've now played this game twice and never had to do any of that. I wouldn't even say I drove safely. I just enter a different car after every mission and never had to deal with it. You can peek into nearly every window in Greenvale, but 99 out of 100 times there will be nothing of interest in them, so you just have to sit through 2 loading screens for nothing. This is a particularly cruel act on Swery's part to include the facsimile of gameplay centered around voyeurism and refuse to do anything interesting with it. That's all I want. My dream game is a game where 90% of what you do is rifle through people's belongings and criticize their lack of decorative sense. The other 10% is hitting people with the butt of a rifle. I guess what I'm describing is looking at 3D walkthroughs on Redfin, or as I like to call it, the best game. On top of all the baked-in gameplay issues, Deadly Premonition has a lot of trouble running smoothly on PC. It would frequently crash so intensely that I couldn't even alt-tab out of it and had to hard reset. This instilled a general anxiety throughout my whole playthrough that had me obsessively saving at every phone I could find, more so than I already would have been. And not even that saved me, because there is a certain well-known crash that happens after this cutscene and pretty efficiently breaks your game. I was forced to download someone else's save file, which did allow me to move past this scene and complete the game, but they had already done a decent amount of the side missions, so I'm just kind of shit out of luck there. I'm really not fond of Deadly Premonition's gameplay. I think there is too much not working, there's too much missing, and what's left is a lot of tedium, moments where I don't know why I needed to have control of York, even if it's something simple and narrative focused, like this scene where a young York follows the ghost of his father in a dream. It's very boring, it's just so slow that it's frustrating. Just please fucking run, go get your dad! I can't imagine it was easy trying to find gameplay that allowed its long, winding story to be told the way it was and still fill an open world with a bunch of stuff to distract yourself with. You know, because they didn't do it, so I guess it must have been hard. I remember Game Informer opened their review of Deadly Premonition by likening the design of its gameplay to a relic from the 90s, but that design is still desirable. Like, developers to this day try to replicate that. 90s game design to me denotes charm and nostalgia. I think Deadly Premonition's problem is in consistency and motive. It doesn't feel like there is a gameplay loop. It feels like a repetitive collection of mini-games broken up by a very interesting story and driving. There is also design that doesn't prove to have a purpose. There isn't anything justifying why they put so much time into the day and night cycle of Greenvale. There's an interview with Swery waxing poetic about how much work went into making Greenvale feel alive and realistic, down to calculating what the minimum wage would be. And while I can recognize the creative glee that must have gone into doing things like that, it doesn't really matter when Greenvale primarily feels barren and purposeless. I don't get any kind of enjoyment from exploring it. It's a complete disservice to how creative and full of character its story is. I think the story works well enough that maybe I don't look past the flaws of its gameplay, but I suppose I don't think about it all the time. Until they make me follow a dog from one side of the map to another.
It's just so manipulative of them. They know I'll follow a dog anywhere, and I do want to see where this one is going, but it's just like it doesn't feel right.
Like everything else about this game, Deadly Premonition is graphically kind of a mess. Even on release, it was clear that this game looked out of sync with other games, in no small part due to how gaudy and colorful all of its UI and menus look. It almost looks like it's trying to harken back to PS1 era survival horror game design like Silent Hill, but overshooting it. The way you pick up items that appear as a spinning model in a black void with a kind of typewriter looking font. I do enjoy things like this. This is an aesthetic I like, but it's far from subtle. Outdoor environments can look sort of sterile and boring, a lot of repeated textures, but a lot of the interiors have a great deal of detail. There is a charm to the care put into creating all the little models for something like the food in the diner, where most games, and other parts of this game even, would be more likely to take a shortcut and just have a shelf of food made out of a static two-dimensional image of food. Character models are all very stiff and dead-eyed, which almost works in the game's favor. Some of the punchlines that don't necessarily land through voice acting hit a little harder when they just linger on a character's lifeless, glassy eyes. I mean, I'm being an asshole, but I don't actually mind the way this game looks. Aside from recycling a bunch of assets, there is something comforting about the game's entire lack of visual style. Some games are kind of ugly, but that doesn't make them lesser in my eyes. It's okay that your tie is completely fucked. What's happening to it? They impaled my boy. You're beautiful all the same. The real issue I have with Deadly Premonition visually is that after how much it took to just get to the end of this game, I look back and all of my 16-hour playthrough is full of frequent random visual pop-ins, literally just weird, distorted images of the game and whatever was on my desktop, fighting over what deserves to be recorded. This could be the fault of a number of things that aren't Deadly Premonition, but based on its track record, I'm going to go ahead and assume it's the game's fault that I had to perform surgery on 16 hours of footage to cobble together this video and make it look as though it wasn't just as fucked as the rest of this experience. No matter what iteration of this game you play, it's likely you'll experience some sound issues. It never ceases to amaze me how many times this game gets re-released, how many chances it gets, and issues from its first version still crop up unaddressed. I learned this as soon as I stepped foot into a car for the first time.
So, about those bonus features in PDDs nowadays.
I'm sorry, you're gonna have to speak up.
From the 80s have almost no bonus material, even if they do use a trailer.
What? When it's working as intended, Deadly Premonition's sound design is somehow a bigger misfire than its gameplay. The fault of the gameplay is that it's often tedious while being dominated by an aspect of the game that was rushed out the door. But the sound is bad because it was admittedly outsourced and not considered by the development team. Access Games did not have an in-house sound team, so they instead chose to leave that to someone who seemingly pulled from a library of laughably generic sound effects, including a number of overused dramatic stingers like this one. I think it does add another layer of humor to this game when you consider that all of the sound effects were handled by some rogue agent not affiliated with the rest of this game's production, and Swery had zero input on it. This guy had to know what he was doing. Maybe he knew what a meme this game was shaping up to be and said, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make the squirrels sound like monkeys. I'm like a monkey. I'm like a stinky little monkey. I don't have any issues with the voice acting.
Looks like we're being welcomed. Zach, I'll let you handle the meet and greet.
They are often doing the best they can with occasionally clunky dialogue.
I've nothing to say to you.
I haven't asked you anything yet, Jack.
Shut it!
And only a few characters get to really play around with a big kind of cartoon performance.
Oh my pot is getting cold.
Yeah! York, who is voiced by Jeff Kramer, is probably the most entertaining, if only because he's given the most interesting character. He's given all the best lines, and he really sells the role of an over-the-top noir detective character breaking apart inside.
You should come to my station. I'll give you a little extra service.
That would be great. I can't believe how expensive gasoline is nowadays. Some extra service would be great. Now, about my current case.
Being simultaneously the coolest motherfucker on earth, but also a profoundly broken person up in his noodle. A frequent criticism I hear about the game is that the music is jarring and tonally inconsistent.
I get where you're coming from. I used to dress like a hardcore punk rocker when I was in high school.
You? A punk rocker?
Jumping around from theme to theme in the middle of scenes. While I do agree this is a thing that happens, and that may or may not agree with you, I do think this was done intentionally to mirror something that Twin Peaks does a lot. Twin Peaks has a beautiful, dreamy soundtrack that is part of its setting's DNA, and it jumps around from track to track based on what kind of scene is happening and who's on camera. These changes can be sort of abrupt or even abrasive sometimes because of the way that show plays around with tone. the score will change pretty suddenly when a new character enters a scene, or when the atmosphere of the scene changes to punctuate a shift to horror or comedy. This might have been a way to further indulge in their warped vision of a soap opera, but it also just keeps you on your toes emotionally. As an example, in this scene, Shelly is quitting her job at the diner, and it's a really sad moment for her because she loved her job, but she has obligations at home now. So the music is very soft and sympathetic, and as that moment is passing, Ed and Nadine enter, who are often comic relief characters, and the music jumps to being more wild and fun. They then start talking to Shelly and Norma, who along with Ed are keeping a secret from Nadine. So in this moment, they're all sort of playing along with a lie, and the music becomes still playful but more mysterious.
Norma! Say, how long have you been working here?
I would have liked to have just played the whole scene for you, but YouTube would not have liked that. But real time, that's 3 different tracks in like 35 seconds. Something that probably passes by a little less noticeably when all the soundtrack has one cohesive style to it. But it is a thing I think they are doing on purpose and that they learned from Twin Peaks. Deadly Premonition has a lot of good songs in its soundtrack, but you can't really score a video game like you could a show, so you're gonna hear them a lot. And a lot of these tracks do seem to be taking inspiration from the actual Twin Peaks soundtrack. One of the most notable being the song listed as Greenvale theme, which evokes a very similar feeling to Laura's theme. I think the only problem with the soundtrack is that there are too few tracks and all of them demand so much attention. They are all earworms that don't subtly move between each other. It's just loud crazy song to loud crazy song. Free jazz, whistling, hip hop. And just by chance, every now and then, they'll nail it and really get an atmosphere going when conditions are right. There's a track during one of the flashback segments that sounds straight out of Silent Hill, or indeed another David Lynch property. Another of the more Badalamenti-esque tracks is this one that plays during one of the boss fights. I'm more and more realizing that I just want things to be more like Twin Peaks, maybe until they are Twin Peaks, because the things I want them to develop and go further on are ultimately the things that remind me of it. But I'll try to make sure that's the end of my commenting on that show. Actually, no, I won't do that. This game is beyond bad in every way. It has alright concept, but executes it in the worst way. The music, graphics, frame rate, gun controls, oh my god, it's bad. The sound effects sound 16-bit at most. The only good thing is the voice acting. Some Bobby, give these guys a raise and god damn it, fire everybody else who had anything to do with this game. If you did buy it, let the guys at Ignition Games know how disappointed you are. And furthermore, we don't deserve this crap. Or if you want a good laugh, rent it. Love the passion behind it, love the energy. I love when somebody comes in hot and then walks it back bit by bit until they whittle it down to a recommendation for a rental. This was a waste of money. I bought it because I like the Silent Hill game series and I thought this would be in a similar vein. It was a PS2 developed game that was released on PS3 and it looks like it. There is nothing good about this game. I feel like the programmers said to themselves, let's just get this done, and they packaged it and sent it out. Load times are long, which is indicative of poor memory management with programming. The controls are clunky and choppy, as well as the cutscenes, which is indicative of lack of beta testing. First of all, calm it down, Todd Howard. Where's your game, Mr. Game Development Expert? That's indicative of you not being a game development expert. Shut up! Secondly, I don't think any of this game's flaws stem from a lack of commitment or heart. I think because it was so stalwartly sticking to mostly one person's very specific vision and then ran through the shredder that is publisher input, it came out the way it did. I can make fun of this game all day, but I don't think I could ever say it's reflective of a dev team that didn't care. They just cared too much about something that was bad. Totally disappointed. Way too weird. I want a game, not interactive movie. You don't know what an interactive movie is. You're an idiot. I fucking hate reviews like that. When you dismiss something entirely as something so off base, I couldn't even say it's hyperbole, just misinformation. The big one, the most common insult I've seen lobbed at this game is that its graphics look like X older console. I've omitted several of these entirely because even though I'm often on the side of negative reviews, people don't have very good memories about what PS1 and PS2 games look like. Although I do realize that acknowledging that is acknowledging the passage of time in between consoles, which is understandably depressing. I like weird, I like unusual, I like different, I also like good quality. This game doesn't even look or play as well as a PS1 game. See, there it is. Not sure if the dialogue is translated, but it is just creepy in a pedophilia kind of way. When the old man tells the little girl he is going to tell her a strange and nasty story right at the beginning of the game, I probably should have stopped playing right there. But I continued a little further in the game, and with the hideous gameplay and controls, 2010 game? Really? I just couldn't stand it. Comparing it to Twin Peaks or any other odd genre is only giving it credit where it deserves none. There is zero storyline. Even Twin Peaks started with a storyline. This game is a personal affront to the console it was made for. Don't buy it. There is zero storyline. But like, there is though. It's like the one thing this game gets right. It's what's carrying it. There is so much of it. How would you play even 2 minutes of this game and not recognize how much plot is going on? I think you mean there is zero storyline that you cared to follow. Do me a favor, consume more media, but also look at any game for the PS1. Any single one of them, and I guarantee you, Deadly Premonition looks technically better than it. Technologically, this looks like a game made for its generation. The problem is that it's ugly. Its art style isn't cohesive. It looks like a mess. I don't know how much of that is intentional. I could be wrong, but I see an intentional attempt at replicating certain bits of design from older games. But who's to say? That could just be me instinctively becoming more defensive about this game in the face of uninspired criticism. Nothing at all good with this game. There really is nothing good I can say. I have a headache from playing it, and I don't get headaches. I also don't write reviews, but had to this time. Very hard to navigate. The toolbox concept is terrible. Cutscenes are everywhere. Ability to save is rare, so you end up spending 30 minutes without a save, only to die. This was the worst part of the game. I gave up after about 1.5 hours total. Over 2 nights. Bad game. Can't believe the good reviews. You will regret spending $1 on this. Well, kudos on being impervious to headaches, and my condolences for finding your apparent kryptonite. I love cutscenes are everywhere, because they are, I suppose. I just never thought to phrase it in such a way, but I suppose that only comes from viewing cutscenes as an obstruction to gameplay.
Consumed 15 donuts today, Diane. All jelly.
I don't know how to remedy that, seeing as though it's a game that lives or dies by that narrative, and if you're trying to avoid it, you're not gonna like it. You won't be able to. You can't. I feel like you're gonna be in for a lot of headaches if you spend your gamer career trying to avoid plot. Complete junk. I normally can't be bothered to write a review, but I made an exception for this. I watched a review of this game before buying it, and the review was positive, so you can imagine my disappointment when I finally got this game several months late and found it to be complete junk. The graphics are atrocious, the controls are atrocious, the game engine is atrocious, the voice acting is atrocious, everything about this game is atrocious, and the cutscenes, the damn cutscenes. That damn cutscene. There is one every 5 seconds, and I skipped through most of them. Some you can't, because I couldn't take watching them anymore with the horrid animations and voice work. A game like this shouldn't exist in this time period. This looks and feels like it belongs on the PS2. But the sad part is that I have played many PS2 games that are far better than this. Okay, what was in the review you watched? Did they show footage of the game? Was this a static shot of a person telling you it's a good game? Why would this be all the research you needed to spend money on something? It sounds like you knew nothing about the game, save for the fact that one asshole on the internet said it was good. You gotta start thinking for yourself, buddy. It's the only way we're gonna get through this. Don't say a game you don't like shouldn't exist. There are tons of games I think are bad games, but I don't wish any of them non-existence except for all the sports games. That's all 2 words, low budget. Don't buy this game, it's just terrible. Graphics are so cheap, looks like a PlayStation 1 game, the controls aren't good, and the so-called monsters in the game are so pathetic. Don't waste your money or your time, stick with Silent Hill. Honestly, 4 stars rating? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? People like things I don't like, but every choice I've ever made has been the right one. You know, I'm all for Japanese horror games. Seriously, I really am. But this game is so bad. I could care less of its following or that it's a cult game. This game is horrible. I figured its original Japanese theme would have me falling in love with it. But holy hell, I'd rather sit down and with Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck and do a run through of Geely and discuss the character motives and later watch the director's cut extended edition on Blu-ray with them commentating on each scene. Then later, after the movie's done, go to a Nickelback concert. This game blows! People think it's so good because it's so bad. It sounds like you were gravely misinformed when purchasing this game. I do appreciate you referring to the act of watching a film as a run-through though. I myself just finished a speedrun of the Snyder Cut. I figured out an exploit where I take a bunch of sleeping pills. Deadly Premonition is particularly hard to describe and hard to recommend. I think if you're more into games that fall out of easy classification, you're likely to be entertained by this game. That is not to say I think you'll have fun playing it or you'll come out thinking it's a good game, but the experience of it will be entertaining and at the very least memorable. I guess I could say the same thing about Twin Peaks. You might vibe with it, you might not, but there will probably be parts of it that stay with you. It's something even I have been unable to truly quantify. I laughed a fair bit both at and with it. I felt the emotional weight of certain scenes, and these are both things that do not happen often for me with games. So I respect when a game can drag that out of me. At the same time, I have to accept that there is a not insignificant part of me that is fixated on the parts of the game that are shamelessly ripping off a franchise I love. That I am in some sense being manipulated, having the keys of Twin Peaks dangled in front of me while I wade through some truly unpleasant gameplay. If I couldn't sense the heart behind this game, if it felt soulless, I think I'd accept Deadly Premonition as garbage. Thankfully, I do sense that the creation of this game meant a lot to someone. It's a multi-layered cake made with someone's blood, sweat, and tears. So if you can get past the taste of those bodily fluids, you might find a decidedly unique experience. Its writing and bizarre deadpan sense of humor are its greatest strength, with much of the gameplay feeling obligatory, as though it's actively trying to find excuses for you to interact with it, no matter how trivial. It's graphically in a strange limbo between looking like a throwback and looking like it had to cut corners because of how overly ambitious they were, trying to breathe life into an open world for a budget release game that had a number of setbacks, including a new generation of consoles their team did not yet know how to develop for. So you have character models with detailed faces and blocky bodies, barren streets with advanced lighting, and a collection of clever mechanics with the design sense of an arcade light gun shooter. It's got a fun soundtrack that may have been a little mishandled and can be overbearing a lot of the time, voice acting that ranges from good to campy but serviceable.
You liked hard and heavy, punk. Like crash.
And sound design that is probably its biggest failing aside from the still very much present assortment of bugs and crashes. Access seems pretty comfortable, continuing to release their work poorly optimized and barely functioning, and then moving on to the next iteration without addressing that. Its director's cut is very much the mission accomplished banner of the franchise, the definitive, complete version of Deadly Premonition that is probably the most broken as well. I won't deny there is a fascinating allure to this game, to the anomaly of its existence. It's not an industry that fosters auteur game design, so it's always a marvel when something claws its way out of the void and winds up on a store shelf with such a distinctive voice.
A fish. But this isn't the time to be fishing for fish, Zach.
But on its way out, it appeared to lose some limbs and gain a bunch of weird vestigial appendages, but there it is, sitting there like some kind of deformed unicorn, a freak show curio. You walk around it, taking in its splendor, and likely scratching your chin and saying, huh, so like anybody can make a game? Hey, you reached the end of the video. Wow, unbelievable. Thank you so much for doing that. Thank you so much for your support. If you would like to partake in any of the engagement options available on this great website, please do so now. These come in the form of likes, subscribes, and comments, or visiting the links in my description. Links such as my Patreon, Discord,
Twitter, Bandcamp, merch. Also, I'd like to plug somebody else's channel. If you didn't know, one of my favorite games of all time is Phantasmagoria 2, A Puzzle of Flesh. Yeah, I got it right here. I always keep it close to me because I develop unhealthy relationships with things. If you have not played this game, it is a fantastic relic to the glory days of FMV. And as this great pull quote on the side of it says, gore, gore, and more gore. So, and the other side says sexiest computer game. Both are true. In any case, Paul Morgan Stetler, who plays Curtis, the protagonist of this game, has started doing some live streams celebrating the game's 25th anniversary, and he plans to do some interviews with other people involved in the game's production, which sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. So I can include links to that as well in the description. Anyway, thanks again for all your support, and an extra special thanks to Ailing Uncle, Alexander Smith, Alexander Sundin, Andre Perkins, Aubrey, Bayard Brown, Pizza Shift, Charles Marr, Daphne Pittendry, Dark Raptor 86, Das Days, Edward Avila, Fart Mother, Game Master, Jacob Sewers, J L Amin, Joseph Zanoni, Carrot, Karen Mayville, Ken Dog, Matt Bastard, Moonpix, Nazim Kamalu Ray, Nekot the Brave, Newstime, Octo, Oisto, Resurrection, Ruibi Somem, Salvatore Tosti, Stuka Bliat. This deal is getting better all the time. Huh, well good. Turts, Wayne Bristol, Whip It Out, XX Darkened Streams Fan, XX fuck yeah dude, Ava Nerve, Giraffa, A Hanging Chad, Brozoof Jones, Donut Stalker, Ishanji, Mad Monty 98, Mirden Emrys, Gonna take a stab in the dark here, Nafid Hakun, Ophelia Fishwife, P Dizzle, Persian Air, Robert Brandon, Rose, Samuel Ward, Sergei Vorontsov, Simon Murray, Skeleton, Sorenville, Technica, Alistair Stewart, Andrew Light, Big Honk, Bishy 93, Brandon Harden, Brendan McFadden, Brett Weaver, Brody Gibson, Dan Cullen, David Fromke, David Harpstrite, Dazed Clockwork, Example Username, Fickle Pickle Jar, Haley Babella, Hannes Jacoby, Hitoshi-san, Jake Desi, Jake Raynor, James Bloom, Duran Kemp, Jordan Balzano, M, Mandalore Gaming, Marcus Chaney, MCR, Meandrat, Mystical Lint, Name Requires DLC, Nick Timmons, Niles D. McDonald, Ombud, Quinn McElroy, Robert, Roland, Spooky, Stever, Swood Operator, Teeth, The Teeth, Tomas Pelican, Travis Houston, Tyler Robinson, ZJ, 4-Hour Depression Nap, Adam Page, Adrian AI, Alas Ratgunk, Alec Galler, Alex Theodorov, Anna Trans Rights XO, Andrei Kalganov, Airatak, Eris Alessandrakis, Arminius J, Arshez Knight, Atlantean Goldfish, Austin Scott, Beardicus, Ben L, Big Cheese 1000, Binary Vision, Bindle, Blatheris, Boris Rumbolt, Brendan Naftal, Brianna Maria McKenzie, Brian Callan, Calavera, Callum May, Cannon Go Boom, Chris Jordan, Chris Tallarico, Colin Boyd, Colton Rowe, Kami Hog, Commissar, Crispy, DS Carmen, Dalamanek, Dan Richardson, Daniel Person, Dark Cloud 402, David Quinn, David Offord, Declan J. Keane, Demenza's Gate, Der Commissar, Dilda, DJ Necroman, Doxipine, Dubs, Dylan Sorum, Edward Crawford, El Jaguar, Enzo, Ursandro, Fazy, Fred Greisen, Gokujo Drops, Greg Buchhold, Grimbeard and Nerl are my two dads, Homeboy Dirtbag, INTJ loves her INTP, Evo Zap, Jay Marshall, James Young, Jean-Philippe Malouin, Joe Jameson, Joe Face, Jojo Evans, J Raptor, Justin Stewart, Khalil Corey, Keith Pitt, Chris Odie, KS, League of Struggle, Leland Miliokis, Lorelei, Lost Via Domus, Lucas Kettner, Major Millions, Mangy Mongrel, Megan Carmody, Meme Queen, Micah J. Best, Michael King, Mike Amarillo, Mike Garza, Maka, Mr. Sark, Mr. Bojangles, Q-Chan, Nicholas Nelson, Nick Hill, Nikita Denisov, Nuan Sonar, Olympus 3DX, Omar Eid, OP Downfall, Otter Soldier, Pen Knight 89, Petrus Montanu, Red Stoyan from Bulgaria, Ross Armstrong, Rowdy Roddy Peeper, Roy Gendron, Skos117, Sean Clausen, Sergey Vidovin, Saidi, Smokey Jefferson, Sonata Fanatica, Spider, Steinuel, Strakinya Rudenkovic, Sweet Pernatural Pete,
Sidney Steverson, Tax Deductible, T. Stoney, Terranism, Tino Richter, Totally Not a Mimic, Trenton Wilkins, Tyler F., Tyler Long, Vargar, Vivitis, Flasdan, Vulpix Chick, Webgoth, Xanax OD Grindcore Lover, Ya Boy Nikki G, Yak Spiker, Zachariah I Am, Zdenek Manesh, Zubertuber, a perfectly normal human and definitely not a dog that learned how to use a computer, AJ Leroy, A.L. Carpenter, A Bonkers Chicken, Adolency, Adrian Facci, Adventure Game Geek, Alex Stutson, Alex Hanna, Alexis Pincinalt, Anthony Daniel, Austin Mathis, Baker, Belial, Brad, Brian Sansone, B. Suppi, Kanum, Kaz, Christian Danny Storgard, Christopher White Schneider, David Moreau, Diggity D7187, Drenched, Drunk Taco, Gamesbrit, Gargantua, Gato Malo, Ghost LPs, Half Asian Viking, Hashi Singh, Hinchus, Homeboy Dirtbag, Weelay, Ian Laser, Ignacio de Guglielmi, IP68, Jeep Pete, Joe Reynolds, Johan Kavand, Jonathan Becker, Jonathanis Eddy, Josh B, Yoni Niamela, Wabuktis, Kakun, Kevin Thurber, Krampig Newt, Lucas, Level Zero, Matthias Waltman, Melly, Melon Man, Miargar, Nameless, Nicholas Monroe, Nick Hoffman, Niles Crane 19, Odd One Indeed, OK Cat Dad, Ottavio Albanesi, Ova Clemens Karman, Pedro Costum, Perennial Astronaut, Phony Soprano, Piotr Jankowski, Professor Nex, Pixelfish, QTP2T, Ricky Goss, Ricky Rigatoni, Rith, Robert McMahon, Sam C, Schluff, Schwabalaba, Seaway Jerk, Sentient Turtle, Sir Tristan, Silvano Gonzalez, Sir Alohomora, Slava Saknenko, Slavic Dreams, Solarbox, Stephen LaFlame, Sven Grell, Psynoise, Syraprise, Tatami Guy, Tess Dunn, the Becker Sattler Clan, The Gaming Beehive, Little B, The Real Kal-El, The Voyant Claire, Timothy, Uncle Dozer TV, Val Halverson, Valinora, Vincent Cronin, Visitor Information, Warhopper, Wednesday V, Whiskey Grenade, Yuko Valles, One Iserlo, A Brodo, Alex U, Allegory, Andre Kurinkov, Anthony H, Astro Shepherd, Azroy, Bertigan, Bertie Bertig, Big Death Energy, Bitmatter, Bimbizzle, Boyi, Bones Malones, Brandon Shock, Bubblegum Curapop, Buckaroo, Cam, Chalibard, Chef Toker, Chris Barb, Cine Selena, Cloister 56, CMG 161, Conrad Eastman, Krylar, Cryptid John, Daniel Gen, Daniel Newberry, Danny D, Dantech K3, David Badzinski, Dead Alewives, Demar, Devaeth Faust, Dustsucker, Edward Wheeler, 82 Pedro, Emil Johansson, Emmett Arthur, Epic Dude 467, Eric Leung, Eric Lawn, Eugene Balder, Ava Grave Ladova, Fitzgerald 93, Florian Vogel, Fubar Gubbins, Frank, Frantic Atlantic, Freaky Demon, Franz, Furin, Gianni Matograno, oops, I have dropped a cup of coffee, Gideon Joubert, H.L. Longboy, Hamish Batten, Hazel Connor, Hymo Statman, I Fa Down, Ian Baranek, Ikifu, Inside My Strange Place, Jacob Hanley, Jacob Gardner, Jalcor, James Lambert, JDog3433, Jick Magger, John Adams, John Brumley, John Camich, John Stone, Josh Hessler, Joshua McLarnon, Joshua Stewart, Khalifas, KC Ghoul, Kimia, Korn, Curano, Kyle Williams, LaFazar, Lauren Miller, Leonardo Antonio Acosanta, Louis Quinn Whalen, Low C, Love You More, Lucas Mendel, Luke Gazaway, Lynn Lovett, Magno Dick, Manu Weidman, Mara Elena, Matt Chester, Michael B, Mikey Tambourine, Moral, Mungo Jerry, Nagru, Nate Blanchard, Nathaniel Dolenchuk, Negative Creep, Nick Johnson, Octo, Oliver Marshall, Pagan Butler, Pager, Peachy Pixel 8, Pentagon Black, Phoenix Flames, Frand, Poet Russell, Pommy, Pop-Eyed Bark, Prod Mage, Pulpode, QL2040, Quirky Top Hat, Rachel Rose, Rasmus Karras, Raul Vidal, Razzle Dazzle B13, Red, Rayo Palmista, Ren, Ruben, Robert Chernovsky, Robert Scotland, Roosevelt Hoover IV, Ross Carmona, Ryan Malone, Sam Fuller, Sammy 3D, Sarah Denman, Scott Motus, Sean Bradford, Sean Lovett, Sean Tiva, Someone Finally Pays Me, Stanislav, Stephen V. Gaspard, Summerstorm, Sweeneasy, Tayano Sandman, Thisid4, Thyrork, Tony Brandt, Tony Gleed, Saurus, Unpolished Mirror, Van the Cheesin, Vey, Viet Do, Vigo Love, Vinculist, Vlad M, Vucrules, Wendigo, A Fear Worth Living, Who Done It, Will M, William Riker, Walrek, Zan, Yossarian, Zachary Schulstad, Zane Break, and Ziklau for being a patron. Thank you so much. One more time. You have no idea. You don't even know. Thankful to be done with this video, thankful to be able to get back to doing supernatural videos, which are, of course, you know, the long con of this whole channel. That's what I've been working up to this whole time, and it's a dream I could only achieve through you. Stay goth, stay gaming.